morning Iron Veil lost its Luna, the forge fires were still burning. She did not slam a single door. She did not leave a letter behind. She did not scream or cry or demand anyone explain themselves. She simply walked, quietly, steadily, through the east corridor in the grey hour before the pack stirred, with one bag on her shoulder, and a secret pressed so close to her chest that even she had not fully named it yet. Her name was Elira Moonridge. For 3 years, she had been the most quietly invisible person in a house full of people who were supposed to love her. She had learned his silences. She had worn his chosen colours. She had pressed mountain wildflowers into a leather journal by her window, and she had loved him, her alpha king, her bonded mate, with the wholehearted or bewildered love of a woman who still believes that patience is the same as being chosen. She was wrong about that. She found out on a Tuesday, in a corridor that smelled like wood smoke and cold iron, walking toward bread, and what she carried out of Iron Veil that morning was not just a bag, not just a secret. It was a future, and she was going to build it whether anyone gave her permission or not. This is her story. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Because I need to check on you before we go any further. Thank you so much for being here. It really means the world to me. It is essential that we get your support through subscriptions, likes, comments, and shares. So, if this story is already pulling at your heart, which I know it is, please hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Thank you. Now, let us get back to the story. Iron Veil had a smell. Every pack did, if you lived inside its borders long enough. But Iron Veil's was specific, layered, particular, like a signature that had been pressed into stone over generations. Forge smoke from the weapons room, 2 corridors beyond the great hall. Cold mountain air that crept through the seams of the windows, no matter how heavy the curtains. And something older underneath all of it, like the earth itself had exhaled here once, and never fully taken that breath back. Elira had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the sound of your own breathing. Until the morning she noticed everything. She woke before dawn that Tuesday without knowing why. The room was dark. Riven's side of the bed was empty. It was always empty by this hour, the Alpha King preferring his study to sleep, or at least preferring it to the particular kind of closeness that sleep required. She lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling, and listened to the kind of quiet that exists in large houses in the minutes before anyone decides what the day will be. 3 years. She had been Luna of Iron Veil for 3 years. She tried, as she sometimes did in these early dark minutes, to count what that time had been made of. Not the ceremonies or the council appearances. Those were easy to list and impossible to feel. She tried to count the real things, the small ones. The weight of 3 years lived in a particular way. There was the winter after their bonding, and when she had gone to the ridge path at dusk to be alone with the mountain, and had stayed too long, and Riven had come to find her without being asked. He had not said he was worried. He had simply appeared at the edge of the path with his dark eyes and his contained, composed face, and she had looked at him standing there in the cold and felt something warm open all the way through her chest. She had loved him for that. She had thought, this is what it looks like when someone cares without saying so. She had carried that moment for 3 years like something precious. There was the way he sometimes touched her hair in the evenings. Once, just once, before going elsewhere. Always elsewhere. And she had told herself that distance was simply how kings loved, that the warmth would come once he trusted her, once he knew she wasn't going anywhere, She had pressed wildflowers in the journal by her window. Mountain flowers she gathered herself on the ridge path, small and precise and bright in ways that the great hall of Ironvale never quite managed. She pressed them carefully between the pages. Not because anyone asked, not because it served any function, simply because she had always loved the way living things could be preserved without losing their shape. Because beauty, she believed, deserved to be kept. She had learned every child's name in the pack, every single one, down to the smallest, a 3-year-old named Perrin, who called her Luna Lyra, because the full name was too complicated for his small mouth. She had learned which elder took his tea unsweetened and brought it to him that way before he had to ask. She had thanked Eric's, or the kitchen elder, every single morning for the warm bread he saved for her, the end piece, always the end piece, on a board to the side of the main batch, kept warm without her ever needing to request it. These things were hers. She understood that now, looking back on them from the other side of everything that was about to happen. They were not weakness. They were not naivety. They were the natural overflow of a woman whose capacity for warmth was larger than the space she had been given to spend it. But she did not know that yet, at 4:30 on that Tuesday morning. She only knew she could not sleep. She only knew the bread would be warm in the kitchen. She only knew that the pre-dawn hour belonged to no one's expectations. She dressed in the half-dark, simple clothes, warm ones, and she went downstairs. She was not suspicious. She was not looking for anything. She was a woman walking toward bread. The great hall was empty, the long tables ghosted with the particular stillness of rooms that are used to being full. The torches in their iron brackets burned low, throwing orange shapes across the stone floor. Elira moved through it quietly, taking the back corridor that cut through the administrative wing toward the kitchen, the shorter route, the route she always took at this hour, because it saved 3 minutes, and because she liked the way the old portraits looked in low light, a little less severe, a little more like people who had once been ordinary. She was passing Riven's study when she heard the sound, a laugh. Low, deliberate, or the kind of laugh that has nothing to do with something genuinely funny and everything to do with the enjoyment of a private moment. She knew that laugh. Zevira Shadowfang's laugh was like perfume, designed. Elira had heard it at pack gatherings for 2 years, the way it would arrive precisely in the space where attention was already gathered, amplifying what was already there. She had never let herself think too hard about what Zevira was to Riven. She had explained it to herself with the patient, practiced logic of a woman determined to remain reasonable. Advisors close themselves to the alpha. Histories exist before bonds. These things require grace to navigate. She had been very graceful. She had been extraordinarily graceful. The study door was not closed. It was open by perhaps an inch, just the slight gap of a door that had swung on its own in the draft, or had never been pushed fully shut by someone who was not concerned about being overheard. Why would they be concerned? The pack was asleep. The corridors were empty, or they were supposed to be. Elira did not move closer. She did not press herself to the wall in the breathless way of someone seeking drama. She simply stopped, 2 feet from the door, because her feet stopped, and her body followed, and the voices inside the study arrived in her ears with the exact clarity of words spoken in a quiet room through a very small gap. Zevira's voice, warm with amusement. She still watches you, Riven, like you are the most interesting thing in every room. 3 years, and she has not figured out what she is to this house. A pause. The soft sound of something being set down. A glass, she thought. Then Riven's voice. Flat. Unbothered. The voice he used when he was discussing something unremarkable. She's useful. She keeps the elders comfortable. She doesn't complicate things. Elira's hand found the wall, Not dramatically, just found it, the way a hand reaches for something solid when the floor does something unexpected. Zyvira again, lightly. She brings old Torvin wildflowers from the ridge path, wildflowers riven, like a girl on a country holiday. And then, and this was the part that did not break her, but reformed her, quietly, completely, into something different from what she had been 30 seconds ago. Riven exhaled something that sounded almost like fondness, and he said, what in a voice that carried no cruelty and no malice and no weight whatsoever, "She means well. She means well." As though meaning well was the highest ceiling of what he had ever expected from her. As though the 3 years of her warmth and her wildflowers and her careful management of his elders and her patient, wholehearted love were simply the reasonable output of a woman who meant well. As though she were a pleasant piece of furniture that had never disappointed him, because he had never expected it to be anything more than furniture. She stood very still. She breathed. And in the breathing, in the particular quality of the silence that those words left behind, something she had been carefully explaining away for 6 weeks stopped being explainable. Her hand moved. Without her conscious instruction, it moved to her abdomen. 6 weeks, or maybe 7. She had been telling herself it was the altitude, the disrupted sleep, the specific, low-grade exhaustion of performing contentment convincingly over a long period of time. She had not gone to the pack healer. She had not named it, even privately, because naming it would make it real in a way she wasn't ready to hold on her own. But standing in that corridor, with his voice still settling around her like ash, it became real anyway. Both hands, flat against her abdomen, the wall behind her, the forge smoke in the air, the bread warm somewhere ahead of her that she would not now go to get. Her eyes did not fill. Her breathing didn't change. She looked at the half-inch gap in the study door for one long, clear, completely deliberate moment. And then she turned around, and she walked back to her room with the careful, unhurried steps of a woman who had not just heard anything, who was simply returning upstairs because she had remembered something she needed to attend to. She closed the bedroom door behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed, and she began, very quietly and very thoroughly, to think. There is a particular kind of grief that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with noise or visible damage. It arrives instead in the precise, functional movements of a woman who has decided to act before she allows herself to feel. Because if she allows herself to feel it first, she will not be able to act at all. She will sit on the edge of a bed in a house that is not truly hers, and she will stay there until someone comes to tell her what to do next, and she will have learned nothing from the corridor. So Elira moved. She stood, or she went to the wardrobe. She found at the back, behind 2 of the silk things Riven had preferred her in, a soft-sided travel bag, old canvas, one of the buckles slightly bent, something she had brought from her family's territory before the bonding, and never fully unpacked, because the unpacking had always felt like a statement she wasn't quite ready to make. She looked at it for a moment. Then she set it on the bed and began to think, with genuine practical care, about what a woman needs when she is not coming back. Not the ceremony dresses, not the structured things in the colours Riven preferred, the deep blue-greens, the charcoal greys, the particular shades she had begun to reach for, automatically, because she had stopped remembering what her own instincts would have chosen. She left all of that hanging. She left it neatly, which was its own kind of statement, though she would not have said so at the time. Warm things, practical things, layers. She found the small amount of money kept in the lining of an old winter coat. She had never consciously planned this. She could not have told you, if asked, why she had separated it years ago and kept it separate. Some part of her, quieter and more knowing than the part that pressed wild flowers and brought tea to elders, had apparently been making small preparations for a long time without informing the rest of her. She took the journal, the leather one with the wildflowers inside. She held it for a moment before it went into the bag. Held it the way you hold something that is entirely yours when you are leaving a place where very little was entirely yours. The wildflowers were hers. Not the love she had pressed into those pages, the careful, genuine, bewildered love she had brought to this bond. That was hers. She would not leave it behind. She found, tucked in the shelf above the wardrobe, a scarf. His. She had borrowed it once, 3 winters ago, on a cold evening patrol walk when the temperature had dropped faster than expected, and she had not brought enough layers. He had unwrapped it from his own neck without her asking, and placed it around her shoulders. He had not said anything. She had looked up at him, and he had already been looking elsewhere, as though it were nothing, as though the gesture were simply a mechanical response to an observed problem. But she had felt, in that moment, completely and simply cared for. She had held that feeling close for weeks. She took the scarf from the shelf. She stood with it in her hands. Then she folded it carefully along its original fold lines, and she put it back. She did not take it. She carried the bag to the door. She stood there for one moment, looking back at the room that had been hers for 3 years. The window with the mountain view, the journal shelf, the side of the bed that was always only hers. And she let herself feel, for exactly that one moment, the full weight of everything she had tried to build here, and everything it had not been allowed to become. Then she turned and walked out. The east corridor at 4:45 in the morning. The forge fires had come back to life somewhere deeper in the building. She could feel the low warmth of them through the stone floor, and the smell was heavier now, richer, not the kind of smell that under any other circumstances she had always found oddly comforting. The smell of a place that was alive and working, the smell of Ironvale. She was not sure she would miss it. She was not sure she would not. She passed Eric's kitchen. Through the small window beside the door, she could see him already at work in the amber glow of the kitchen fires, a large, quiet man in his 60s who had called her little Luna from her first morning in this house, and had never once adjusted the title or the warmth behind it, regardless of what the politics of the great hall were doing. He was humming to himself. She could not hear it through the glass, but she could see the movement of his chest, the slight rounding of his shoulders in the way of someone who finds genuine contentment in early work. The end piece of bread was already cooling on the wooden board to the left of the main batch. He had already set it aside, without being asked, as always, kept warm and ready for the hour when she would come. She stood at the window for a long moment and memorized him. The way his hands moved, the particular bend of his head when he checked the ovens, the specific warmth of a person who had seen her, actually seen her, not the role, not the Luna title, not the political utility, from the first morning, and had never stopped. She did not go in. She could not go in. She pressed her hand flat against the cold glass for one breath. Then she walked on. At the far end of the lower corridor, before the east gate, she paused at the archway that overlooked the stone training path below. Zanira Ashclaw was already there. 17 years old, fierce and entirely herself in the way of young women who have not yet been persuaded to be smaller. Running her morning laps in the dark, her breath coming in white clouds, her footfalls deliberate and even. She was the kind of girl who was going to be extraordinary, and either the pack would see it in time, or it would lose her to somewhere that would. Elira watched her run for the length of 2 laps. Keep running, she thought. Don't let anyone teach you that your edges are a problem to be smoothed. Then she walked through the eastern gate as the first grey light came over the ridge. No one saw her go. The valley settlement of Cauldron sits at the base of the mountain, like something that rolled down the slope and decided it had found its place. Human scale, quiet, operating mostly outside the awareness of pack politics. The kind of town that minds its own business not from indifference, but from the particular, practiced courtesy of people who have learned that the business of the mountain is rarely theirs to involve themselves in. Elira had $40 and a debit card she had not used in 18 months. She withdrew carefully. Not enough to register as a significant transaction, just enough. She bought water, a road atlas from the gas station rack, a prepaid phone from a weekend market stall run by a compact, unsurprised man who charged fair prices and did not ask questions. She sat on a bench outside the gas station as the town woke around her. The bakery, the early delivery trucks, a woman walking a very large dog with the committed stride of someone who does this every morning, regardless of weather or mood. And she ate a wrapped sandwich from the station cooler, and she thought, with steady and deliberate practicality, about where a woman goes when the place she came from is behind her, and the place she left is also behind her, and what remains is a road and a choice. She had a friend, Seleneva Frostfang, 300 miles south, in a city that was warm enough in autumn and never asked anything of its residents except that they exist in it. Seleneva sent letters with small drawings in the margins, little detailed studies of her neighbor's cat, of the bakery on her street corner, of things she found beautiful for no reason except that she found them beautiful. Or she was the kind of friend who had once spent an entire summer teaching Elira to bake bread from scratch and had never, not once during all of those afternoons of flour and imprecise measuring and things that didn't rise properly, asked Elira what she was moving through or what she was working out. She had simply made space in her kitchen and waited. Elira did not call yet. The prepaid phone needed an account set up, and she wanted 2 more towns between herself and Ironvale before she used it. But she sat on the bench, and she held the knowledge of Seleneva like something warm, a destination, a direction, a specific proof that the road ahead went somewhere. The southbound bus came at 6:47. She paid cash. She took the window seat, second from the back. As the bus moved through the frost-edged meadows of the lower valley, she turned her face to the glass. The mountain appeared in the window, iron veil on its ridge, still and enormous against the early sky, its forge fires invisible from here, but present in the way that things you have known for a long time are always present even when you cannot see them. The tears came then. They came quietly. She kept her face turned to the glass and let them. Private, unhurried. Not the loud kind that announces itself and asks for response, but the kind that happens when something you have been holding very carefully is finally in a place safe enough to be set down. 3 years of being useful. 3 years of pressing wildflowers in careful rows, and loving a man who described her to his lover in the tone of someone making a minor administrative note. She cried for all of it, the love that had been genuine, or the patience that had been real, the small pre-dawn kindnesses that had never been weakness and had never been fully received. And then she stopped. She folded her hands in her lap. The mountain disappeared behind the first curve of the road. She looked forward. Seleneva's apartment building smelled like old timber, and the bakery on the ground floor that operated, as far as Elira could tell, at all hours. There was always something warm rising from below, something with sugar in it, or butter, or both, and the smell met you in the lobby and rode the elevator with you, and was, Elira would later say, the first genuinely uncomplicated good thing she experienced in a very long time. The elevator worked most of the time. She took the stairs to be safe. The guest room had blue curtains, thick, soft, of the particular shade of blue that exists between the sky's sharpest brightness and the deeper color it takes on toward evening, neither cool nor warm, simply present. Elira stood in the doorway of that room with her bag on her shoulder, and felt the ordinariness of it arrive in her chest like a wave she had not been braced for. Simple. Just a room, a bed with actual pillows, a window that looked onto a street where ordinary people were already going about ordinary things. No forge smoke, no portraits of ancient alphas frowning in oil paint, no particular colors that had been chosen for her. Just blue curtains and the smell of bread and a room that asked nothing of her. She had not realized how much she had missed rooms that asked nothing. Seleneva appeared behind her with a warm mug and the expression of a woman who has decided that what her friend needs right now is presence and warmth and not a single probing question. "You look like you haven't slept properly in weeks," she said. "Longer than that," Elira said honestly. Seleneva made bread that evening. From scratch, as always, she went through the whole process with the unhurried attention of someone who understood that the making was as important as the eating. She talked the entire time. Her work, she was a translator, 3 languages, occasionally a 4th when someone was desperate. Her neighbor's cat, who had developed a habit of appearing on her windowsill at 6 in the morning and waiting until acknowledged before leaving. A film she had watched twice recently and still hadn't resolved her feelings about. But Elira sat at the small kitchen table and ate warm bread and listened to the sound of a normal life moving around her, and she felt something in her chest begin, very slowly, to loosen. This was the romance the story was carrying in its quieter spaces, not the grand kind, not the Alpha King kind. The romance of being simply, genuinely wanted. Seleneva had said, "Come," before Elira had finished the sentence asking. She had not needed an explanation or a promised timeline or an assurance that it wouldn't be too much trouble. She had just said, "Come," as though the answer had always been ready and had only been waiting for the question. Elira thought about that as she ate. About how rarely in 3 years she had felt simply and uncalculatedly wanted. Not useful, not politically appropriate, not suitable for the season. Just wanted, the way Seleneva wanted her presence across the kitchen table on an ordinary evening, for no reason except that she was glad to have her there. The contrast with Ironvale did not need to be named. It arrived on its own, and sat quietly between them, and was felt entirely without announcement. Elira told Seleneva the shape of it that weekend. Not all the details. She was not ready for all the details yet, and Seleneva, understanding this intuitively, received what was offered without pushing at its edges. She told her about the corridor, about the words, about the particular quality of Riven's voice, when he had said she means well, the absence of contempt, which would have been easier to hate, the presence, instead of something that sounded almost like mild, resigned affection, the way you might speak of a reliable piece of furniture. She told her about the 3 years of careful performance and genuine love running alongside each other until she could no longer distinguish where one ended and the other began. Seleneva listened the way she always listened, completely without interrupting, both hands around her mug and her eyes steady and unreactive in the specific way of someone who is receiving everything and calculating nothing. When Elira finished, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. Then Seleneva said, "You wrote happy in your letters like it was a decision you were remaking every week." Elira looked at her across the table. Something in her throat tightened. "I didn't want to be wrong about him," she said. Seleneva reached across the table. She put her hand over Elira's, not dramatically, just there, just steady. "You're here now," she said, "or that part is what matters." They sat like that for a little while. 2 days later, sitting on the blue-curtained bed with the afternoon coming through the window in long slanted pieces of light, Elira told her the rest. The part she had been carrying in her hands flat against her abdomen since the corridor. Selenova was quiet for a moment after she heard it. Her face moved through several things. Surprise, and then something more complicated. And then, with characteristic and slightly brisk efficiency, it arrived at practical warmth. "Doctor first," she said. "Everything else after that." Dr. Kalira Grimwood worked from a quiet side street practice 3 neighborhoods over, found through a network of people who existed in the spaces between the ordinary world and the other one, who knew what the world contained and had chosen to be useful in that knowledge rather than unsettled by it. The practice was calm and unhurried. The waiting room had plants in it that were clearly thriving, which Elira took as a good sign about the character of the person tending them. Dr. Grimwood was precise, thorough, and gave the impression of someone who has long since stopped being surprised by most things the world sends through her door. She examined Elira carefully, asked clear questions, and wrote things down in a small notebook with the focused attention of someone who trusted information over assumption. When she sat back, she looked at Elira with an expression that was both warm and very direct. 8 weeks, she said. Strong markers, stronger than I'd typically expect at this stage. She paused, considering. Lichen pregnancies have their own rhythms. You'll want to pay attention to what you feel. You are a more intuitive carrier than you may realize. Elira thought of the low, persistent hum she had been carrying somewhere beneath her ribs for weeks. The thing she had been explaining as exhaustion, as altitude, as the accumulated weight of 3 years of performing contentment. She thought of it differently after that appointment. At the door, Dr. Grimwood looked at her with the direct, unhurried regard of someone asking a question she has asked before in various configurations. "Is the father going to be a problem?" Elira considered the question seriously. "I don't know yet," she said. Dr. Grimwood nodded, as though that were one of the more honest answers she had received. "Come back sooner if anything changes, and eat more protein." On the walk back, Seleneva did not say much. She walked beside Elira at the same pace, and did not try to fill the space with reassurance or future planning, or any of the well-meaning noise that people sometimes make when they don't know what else to do with a large silence. She simply walked beside her. Present, steady. When they reached the apartment building, Elira stopped at the lobby door and said, "Thank you." Seleneva looked at her. "Don't," she said simply. "You would have come running for me." "Obviously," said Elira. They went upstairs. The bakery smell met them at the door, blue curtains in the guest room, the long, specific, uncomplicated piece of an evening that asked nothing except that she rest. She rested. A rhythm established itself. Seleneva worked from the apartment. Headphones on, documents open, with the 3-language translation work moving quietly across her screen from morning into afternoon, while the neighbor's cat appeared and disappeared on the windowsill, on a schedule only it fully understood. The apartment had a quality of purposeful calm about it in these working hours. Things were being done at a measured and intelligent pace by someone who had built her days around her own requirements. Elira sat at the kitchen table with borrowed library books and a new journal. No wildflowers this time, just ink and information. She read pack law. She had more access to it than Iron Vale might have expected. The academic libraries of the ordinary world held more than most packs realized. Documentation, archived ordinances, to legal treatises from the border communities that existed between supernatural governance and the structures of the wider world. She found legal frameworks governing the rights of bonded members in cases of voluntary departure. She found the documented standing of children born outside pack borders. She found case histories, sparse but legible, of Lunars who had contested proceedings brought against them in absentia. She made notes, careful, organized, precise notes, in her own words, so that she would understand them under any circumstances, even difficult ones. She also read something she had not intended to find, a single entry in a historical legal record from a border council 60 years prior, establishing that a child of the Alpha bloodline, if unacknowledged before a formal dissolution of bond was recorded, to carried standing to contest that dissolution at any future point on behalf of their own rights within the pack. The language was old and careful, dense with the particular caution of people who had seen enough complicated situations to know that simple rules inevitably met complicated lives. But the principle was clear. She read it twice. She wrote it out in her own words. She underlined it. Then she sat back and she thought about Riven. Not with bitterness, not with the clean, certain anger that might have been simpler. She thought about him with the particular, aching clarity that comes to a person who has finally stopped protecting themselves from seeing someone accurately. She thought about the winter evening on the ridge when he came because she'd been gone too long. That man had existed. She had not invented him, or the moment was real, and she had loved him genuinely for it. But love and partnership are not the same thing. Caring about someone and choosing to build something honest with them are not the same thing. Riven had offered her the surface of the first and withheld the substance of the second for 3 years. And the specific cruelty of the corridor was not that he had spoken unkindly. It was that he had spoken casually. That he had described her to Zivira Shadowfang in the tone of a man discussing something unremarkable, something that required no particular care or consideration. She had been furniture, useful, seasonal. She sat with that for a moment. Then she turned the page and kept reading. The announcement arrived on a Wednesday morning. Miss Elenova came to the kitchen doorway with her laptop in her hands, and an expression that Elira could not immediately read. Not alarmed exactly, but something careful and deliberate about the way she was holding herself. "There's something on the private channels. You should see it." She handed over the laptop. The posting was brief and formal, in the clipped, neutrally worded style of Iron Vale's administrative communications. It appeared in the private supernatural forum that tracked pack governance and leadership changes, the kind of record that members of the wider community checked for protocol updates, the way ordinary people checked news feeds for weather. The position of Lunar of Iron Vale is currently under transition, pending Elder Council review. Not missing, not absent, not gone. Under transition. Not a person had left. Was not a wife had walked out in the pre-dawn with a single bag and a secret she was still learning how to hold. A position, a vacancy, a role on a roster awaiting reassignment. She had been reduced, administratively, efficiently, without a single raised voice, to a gap in a seating arrangement, a column in a ledger that simply needed to be filled. Elira set the laptop down on the table. She looked at it for a moment. "They reviewed the position," she said. "Not me. The position." Seleneva, leaning against the doorframe, said nothing. She understood when silence was the right contribution. Elira made more coffee. She refilled her cup with the steady movements of a woman who has arrived somewhere clear and does not require any particular ceremony to acknowledge it. She sat back down at the kitchen table, and she opened the pack law book she had been reading before breakfast. She knew now, with complete and quiet certainty, exactly what she was preparing for. She knew how much time she had. She kept reading. The letter arrived through Dr. Grimwood's private network, a sealed envelope with Iron Vale's mark pressed into dark wax, a running wolf inside a ring of mountain peaks. She had seen this mark on formal correspondence for 3 years. She looked at it from the outside now, from across the specific distance she had put between herself and everything it represented, and it looked different, not less significant, just different. Like a symbol you have finally stepped far enough back from to see its actual shape. The handwriting was economical, forward slanting, the script of someone who was permanently slightly in a hurry and had made their peace with that. It was not from Riven. It was from Heir Ashclaw. I know you're safe. I won't tell anyone. But there are things happening in Iron Vale that you deserve to understand before they happen to you. I will be in Cauldron on the 15th, the coffee house on Verin Street. Come if you choose. I will not reach out again if you don't. Elira read it twice, folded it along its original crease, and held it. She thought about Heir. The senior strategist had always been a presence in the council room that was difficult to read. Close-cropped hair, grey eyes that moved around a room with the measured, noting attention of someone who was cataloguing rather than participating. She had never been warm to Elira, but she had also never been dismissive. Or the grey eyes would find her across the table sometimes, watching, assessing, and then moving on without the slight hardening that so many other gazes had carried when they looked at the Luna, whose position existed primarily as a political convenience. Elira had always sensed something in Heir that she could not fully name. Something that watched things and chose its moments and was loyal to a principle rather than to any specific person. That evening she showed Seleneva the letter. Seleneva read it with the efficient focus of someone accustomed to processing information in languages other than her own, and therefore skilled at reading both the stated and the implied. When she finished, she looked up. Do you trust her? I don't know yet, Elira said honestly. But she never pretended to feel things she didn't. At Iron Vale, that was rare enough to be worth something, Seleneva considered. Then, I'm coming with you. She'll know immediately that you're not Pack. She'll know you didn't come alone, Seleneva said simply, which is exactly what I want her to know. Elira looked at her friend for a moment. Then she smiled. Small, genuine, the first uncomplicated smile she had produced in weeks. Yes, she said. All right. The coffee house on Verin Street in Cauldron was warm and unhurried, the kind of place that had figured out the right lighting years ago, and had not changed it since. Heir Ashclaw was already there when they arrived. Corner table, back to the wall, an untouched cup in front of her. The picture of someone who had been waiting with complete composure and no visible impatience. She looked at Elira as she crossed the room, and something moved in the grey eyes, something small and swift and quickly managed, that looked, before composure returned to cover it, very much like relief. You came, she said. You asked. Heir's gaze moved briefly to Seleneva, registered and categorized her in a single practiced sweep, and then returned to Elira without comment on the matter. She gestured to the chairs across from her. When they were settled, Heir spoke directly, without preamble, in the manner of someone who considers unnecessary framing a waste of everyone's time. Zyvera Shadowfang was moving. She had been moving carefully, strategically, for months, building support among the younger council members, cultivating Riven's trust through the specific to expert application of being exactly what he chose to reach for when the complications of governance wore him down. And now she was pushing for formal recognition before the next Elder Council meeting, 6 weeks out. To accomplish this cleanly, the current bond on record needed to be formally resolved. For that, Iron Vale needed either Elira's formal presence in a dissolution proceeding, or a witnessed declaration that she had abandoned her position without cause. He's going to declare abandonment, Elira said. Heir's expression shifted, something careful and honest, and not without a kind of restrained grief in it. That is what Zavira wants. Riven is—" She paused. "Riven is being managed. I want to be clear, that is not a defense of him. He is capable of choosing differently. He simply hasn't. Why are you telling me this?" The grey eyes met hers directly. "Because you are still Iron Vale's Luna under pack law. Because the administrative notice that erased you to a vacant role was a legal maneuver, not a factual one. And because there are people in that pack who saw you, not the role, not the political function, who recognized what you brought into that house, even when they were too careful of the hierarchy to say it while you were there." She paused. Then, more quietly, "There are people who are ready to say it now, if you give them somewhere to stand." The table was quiet for a moment. Outside, Cauldron went about its ordinary Thursday morning. Deliveries, someone arguing cheerfully with a street vendor, a group of children in school uniforms moving in a loud cluster past the window. "He looked for you," Viera said then. "The first 3 days. I want you to know that." He didn't call it looking. He called it a security assessment of the eastern perimeter. He walked the ridge path at dusk, 4 evenings running, and came back each time saying nothing had changed. Elira said nothing. "He is not a man who knows how to want something honestly," Viera said. "That is not a defense of him. It is just what is true." "The names," Elira said. "The people who would stand." Viera opened the small leather case she had carried in. She placed a folded paper on the table between them. "I have also," she said, "done some reading on pack law, specifically on the legal standing of an unacknowledged child of Alpha bloodline in a formal bond dissolution proceeding." She let that sit. Or the weeks between Cauldron and the Elder Council meeting were the most deliberately lived weeks of Elira's life. She contacted each name on Viera's list carefully, through the secure channels Viera had indicated, at a pace that allowed for genuine consideration on both sides. She did not ask for loyalty to herself. She did not ask for anyone to take a side in what could be framed as a personal conflict between an Alpha King and a departed Luna. She asked instead for something simpler and harder. She asked each person to consider what the pack's governance required, what it owed to its future, to its record, to the principle that the Alpha heir couldn't be erased from history by a quiet administrative notice while their mother was being declared absent without cause. Zanira Ashclaw responded within hours. Her message was 7 lines long, written in the large, forward-charging script of someone who had more feeling than patience for careful phrasing, and it contained 2 spelling errors she clearly didn't care about. The substance was clear. "I knew something was wrong the morning you didn't come for bread. Tell me what to do." Torvin Ravencrest, the younger of the 2 Elder Council members, the one whose voice still carried principle rather than pure political calculation, took 2 days. His reply was measured and precise, and said what it needed to say without ornamentation. Old Eric's, who had been in Iron Vale's kitchen since before Riven was Alpha, sent back 4 words, written in the large and careful letters of a man who wrote rarely and meant every time he did. "I have been ready." Mara, the senior healer whose opinions the Elder Council gave genuine weight, sent 3. "I have been waiting." Viera coordinated the legal documentation. Dr. Grimwood, informed of the plan, arrived at Seleneva's apartment door the morning they were to travel north with a bag over her shoulder, and the calm, settled expression of a woman who has made a decision and doesn't require further discussion of it. "Lichen pregnancies at 16 weeks can be unpredictable under stress," she said, by way of explanation, stepping inside. "I'll wait outside the chamber, but I'll be there." Selenova looked at Elira. Elira looked at Dr. Grimwood. "All right," she said. They arrived at Iron Vale's eastern boundary in the early afternoon. Viera was waiting at the boundary stone, one of 7 ancient markers at Iron Vale's perimeter, or the carved symbols worn nearly smooth by weather and years. She looked at the four of them with an expression that passed briefly through something that might have been called impressed before returning to composure. "You didn't come alone," she said. "I learned from someone sensible," Elira said. They walked in together. The great hall. Elira had walked through it hundreds of times, on ceremony days when it was full of the pack's assembled voices and the particular contained electricity of a community gathered together, on quiet mornings when it was empty and the torches burned low and she had the whole echoing space to herself. She had learned its rhythms. She had stopped seeing it. She saw it now. She saw Eric's at the kitchen corridor entrance, and she watched him see her. His face, when he saw her, did something entirely unmanaged. His hands pressed briefly, both of them, flat against the front of his chest, over his heart. He did not move toward her. He did not say anything. He simply stood there with both hands pressed to his chest and looked at her with the kind of regard that could not be performed because it had never needed to be. She looked back at him. One deliberate, full, unhurried look that said everything she did not have time to say. Then she walked on. Above, on the mezzanine that ran above the hall, Zanira was there, gripping the stone railing with both hands, leaning slightly forward, her face entirely open. Not calculated, not performing loyalty. Simply there. Present. Fierce. Ready. 17 years old, and looking at Elira with the expression of someone who has been waiting for the moment when the right person walked back through the right door. Elira held her gaze for a moment, nodded once. Zanira nodded back. The council chamber. It was a room built for authority. Stone arches, the long carved table where Iron Vale's elder council sat, the standing places along the walls where the senior pack members could attend formal proceedings as witnesses. It was the room where she had sat for 3 years, in a dress Riven had chosen, at the table's edge, unconsulted and decorative. She walked in and stood at its center. The room was fuller than expected, but the pack moved information the way all close communities did, not through announcement, but through the changed atmosphere of people who know something significant is approaching. She recognized faces along the walls, some of them calculating, waiting to see which way things would fall. Some of them, Torvin's among them, and Mara's, entirely clear. And at the head of the table, Riven Nightcrest. She had not looked directly at him in 16 weeks. He was exactly as she remembered him, contained, composed, the particular stillness of a man who had learned early that composure was a form of authority, and had never quite distinguished it from the thing itself. He looked up when she entered, as everyone did. And then something happened to his face that she had never seen happen before. Something he did not manage in time. A flicker, fast and involuntary, and quickly covered. But she had spent 3 years learning the microgeography of his expressions, and she knew what she saw. Surprise, and underneath it, something more complicated. Something that looked almost like recognition. The specific, uncomfortable clarity of finally seeing accurately something you have been carefully choosing not to look at directly. 2 chairs from him, Zyvira Shadowfang. Beautiful. Still. Watching Elira's entrance with the expression of someone encountering an unexpected variable in a plan they had considered complete. Nothing broke in her face, but something rearranged itself behind it. Elira stood at the center of the room. She had rehearsed nothing, because rehearsed words sound like what they are, and she had spent 3 years performing for this room's comfort. She was finished with that. "I left this pack 16 weeks ago," she said. The room was already quiet. Her voice moved through it cleanly, without needing to push. "I left because I heard something I was not supposed to hear," I was called useful. I was called easy to manage. I was told I didn't ask difficult questions because I wasn't that kind of woman. She let the room hold that. I want to tell you what kind of woman I am. The air in the chamber did not change temperature, but it changed quality. I am the kind of woman who presses wildflowers in a journal without apology and without asking anyone's permission, who learned the name of every child in this pack, every single one, because I wanted to know them, not because it was a requirement of my role, who thanked Eric's for the bread every single morning and meant every word of it, who brought old Torvin his tea the way he preferred it before he had to ask, because I paid attention to what people needed, because that is simply who I am. She did not look at Riven yet. I am the woman who left, not because she broke, and not because she was chased out, and not because she was weak. I left because I finally saw clearly enough to understand that this child... And then she placed both hands on her abdomen. The silence changed quality entirely, like something in the room's chest had stopped. Deserves a mother who was not described to someone else in the tone of a minor inconvenience. This child, your heir, Iron Veil, is not a private matter. Under pack law, a child of Alpha bloodline is the pack's future, and I will not allow the future to be quietly filed away while the role I held gets reclassified as a vacancy pending review. Now she looked at Riven, directly, fully, without performance. I am not here to reclaim a title. I am here to ensure that what you are about to erase from the official record is not simply a wife you underestimated. It is also your child, and I will not allow that to be silent. The chamber was completely still. Riven held her gaze, and something behind his composure, not the composure itself, but the thing it had been covering for 3 years, shifted. Visibly, unmistakably. Not into grief, exactly, into something harder and more honest than that. The face of a man who has arrived, several crucial steps too late, at accurate understanding. The silence stretched. Zivira's composure held at the surface, but her hands, Elira noted, were very still on the table in the way of a person making deliberate, conscious effort. Then Riven spoke. One sentence, stripped of ceremony and calculation, and every form of management. The first fully honest thing he had said in her presence in 3 years. The child will be recognized. Viera, against the far wall with her arms folded, did not say anything. She didn't need to. Her presence was already the argument it had always been. Zivira's composure did not break, but something behind her eyes did. A swift, controlled repositioning of someone who has encountered the one thing that was not in her plan, and is already deciding what comes next. She looked at Riven. He did not look back at her. Torvin's voice came from down the table. The recognition will be entered formally into the pack record today, right before the chamber disperses. Before, Elira agreed. She stood at the center of the room, both hands resting at her sides now, and she looked at the chamber, at the stone arches, and the carved table, and the faces arranged around its edges, with the clear, unperforming gaze of a woman who has said what she came to say, and will not need to say it again. The formal recognition was entered into Iron Veil's official pack record that same afternoon. Not pending, not conditional. Entered, witnessed, signed by Torvin's hand, and countersigned by the chamber majority before a single person left the room. Elira stood and watched the ink go down on the page. Real ink, pressed into a physical record, or the kind that required a deliberate act to remove. And she felt something in her release that she had been holding since the morning she walked out through the eastern gate. She did not stay for the ripple of conversation that followed. She did not need to see who recalculated, and who had always been clear, and who was quietly, belatedly ashamed. Those were Iron Vale's conversations to have. She had contributed what she came to contribute. She walked out through the kitchen corridor. Eric's was there. He had the end piece of bread, warm, wrapped in the same plain cloth he always used, and he was holding it with both hands with the specific, practiced calm of a man who has been waiting and is neither surprised nor rushed by the arrival of what he was waiting for. She took the bread from him. She ate it standing in the corridor between the chamber and the kitchen, with the smell of forge smoke in the air above, and the warm smell of the bread itself below. And she felt, for the first time in 16 weeks, entirely in the right place for entirely the right reasons. "Little Luna," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Just Elira," she said. He nodded, satisfied, the expression of a man who has always used the right name internally, and is simply glad the official record has caught up. She did not go back to living in Iron Vale. This matters. The story deserves its honest ending rather than the convenient one. She found a house at the mountain's base in the town of Cauldron, or where the coffee house on Verin Street had become a place with a specific meaning, and where the baker on the main road made bread that was almost, but not quite as good as Eric's, and had the grace not to pretend otherwise. The house had a garden behind it, and a ridge path nearby, and the kind of rooms that asked nothing except that you fill them with the life you actually choose. She made it hers, slowly, deliberately. Her colours on the walls, not deep blue-green, not the carefully managed palette of someone else's preference, but the warm, particular colours she would have chosen for herself if she had ever been given the space to choose. She planted things in the garden. She pressed the first wildflowers from the ridge in the same way she always had, carefully and without apology, in a new journal. Seleneva moved to Cauldron, where she claimed the altitude improved her translation work, which was almost certainly untrue, and which Elira did not challenge. Having Seleneva 3 streets away was, she would later say, one of the better ongoing arrangements of her life. Tea was available. Bread was available. And the particular comfort of a person who has known you well through a difficult time and continues to know you well on the other side of it was, it turned out, something she had not understood how much she needed until she had it. Dr. Grimwood established a part-time practice 2 towns over. She arrived for appointments with the same brisk efficiency, and the same calm precision, and the same note in her notebook, and she never once suggested that Elira was anything other than capable and clear-headed, which was, in its own way, as much of a gift as anything. The spring came, and with it, Lyran. Born on an early morning, the kind where the sky goes from deep grey to the specific, deliberate gold of a sun that has decided it will not be delayed today. Pale-haired, which was Elira's side of the equation. Dark eyes. Riven's eyes, unmistakably, in a combination that startled even Elira the first time she truly looked at her daughter and saw both of those things together in one small face. She held her and thought, here is someone who will not be described to anyone in the tone of a minor inconvenience. Not on Elira's watch. Not ever. She named her Lyran. Zavira Shadowfang left Iron Vale within the month following the council chamber. Quietly, without ceremony, without public announcement, which was itself a kind of answer to several questions that the pack had been asking. Where she went was not Elira's concern, and she didn't spend energy on it. Viera Ashclaw became something that required a new word. Not a friend, exactly, not in the warm and uncalculated way that Seleneva was a friend. Something more angular, more honest in a specific, bracing way. Viera told the truth, even when it was inconvenient, and she did not soften it for comfort, and she was entirely reliable in the specific sense that means you always know where she stands. This turned out to be worth quite a lot. Torvin's voice on the Elder Council grew more consistent and more direct in the months that followed. Zanira kept running her morning laps and sent letters that arrived with fierce energy and occasional misspellings and pack law questions that reflected a mind working at things seriously. Elira answered every single one of them, thoroughly, because that was the kind of woman she was, and because Zanira was going to need those answers. Riven came to see Lyran. He came the first time 3 weeks after the birth, arriving without ceremony at the door of the house in Cauldron, with the particular contained stillness of a man who is uncertain of his reception, and will not perform certainty he does not have. He was not in alpha mode, which was, she noted, the first time she had seen him without it in 3 years. He held Lyran with the careful hands of someone holding something they do not want to get wrong. He said very little that first visit. He asked how Elira was. She told him honestly, which felt strange, and then felt like the right register for everything from here forward. He stayed for 40 minutes. He said goodbye to Lyran in a voice that was quieter than his normal voice. He left. He came back. He kept coming back. Not because pack law required it. It did not, exactly. Because something in him that 3 years of composure and distance and careful management had never quite reached had been reached by the fact of Lyran. Something that hadn't been accessible before the corridor, before the council chamber, before the moment Elira had stood at the center of a room and told the truth about herself clearly enough that there was nowhere left for the untrue things to hide. He sat at her kitchen table sometimes when he came. She made tea. They talked about Lyran, her new sounds, her precise and confident opinions about which objects in the room deserved her attention and which did not, to her habit of pressing whatever small leaf or petal she could find against the pages of whatever book was nearest to hand. Once, carefully, in the voice of a man who had been working toward something for some time, Riven said, "I walked the ridge path at dusk for the first week after you left. I told Viera it was a security assessment." Elira looked at him across the table. "Was it?" A pause. Honest, unhurried. "No," he said. She nodded. She did not offer him absolution. He did not ask for it, which was the right instinct, and also, she thought, a sign that something in him was genuinely changing. She simply nodded, and they drank their tea. And Lyran, in her chair between them, regarded her own fist with the solemn, dedicated attention of a person encountering something deeply interesting. It was not the love story Elira had imagined when she first came to Ironvale, the grand, certain, sweeping kind, the kind that required nothing because it answered everything. This was slower and more careful, and built on something more durable, the particular foundation of two people who have finally agreed to be honest with each other. Not lovers yet, not anything with a simple name, but something real, something being built with genuine materials, something that might, if handled with care, become a thing worth having. She thought, "This is more than I had for 3 years." She thought, "This is a beginning." She left it at that. It deserved to be left there, to be given the time and space to become whatever it was actually going to be, rather than being decided for it. Lyran was 2 when she learned about the wildflowers, and she had found a small yellow one near the garden wall, the kind that grows in the cracks of old stone and has no particular name in any botanical guide, but is beautiful in the specific, unconcerned way of things that grow where they are not expected. She carried it in both hands very seriously across the garden and presented it to her mother with the expression of someone delivering something of great value. Elira received it as such. She took the flower with both hands, matching Lyran's seriousness, and she thought, "Here we go." She carried it inside. She found the journal, the new one, Lyran's journal, started on the day she was born and waiting. She pressed the flower between 2 pages carefully, The way she had been pressing flowers since before she could have explained why, or the way she would press them for the rest of her life without apology or explanation. Lyran watched with wide, fascinated dark eyes, Riven's dark eyes in Elira's daughter's face, which was still a combination that did something to her chest every time she looked at it. "Again," Lyran said. "Whenever we find something worth keeping," Elira said. Lyran considered this with the gravity of a 2-year-old processing a principle for the first time. "Why? Because beautiful things deserve to be kept, even small ones, especially small ones." Lyran looked at the journal, then at the flower pressed inside it, then up at her mother with an expression that was entirely her own, not Elira's, not Riven's, not anyone's borrowed feature worn on a face still learning itself. Her own. "Okay," she said, with total and satisfied certainty. And she went back to the garden to find another one. On certain mornings, when the wind came from the right direction, the forge smoke smell of Ironvale drifted down the mountain and settled briefly around the house at the mountain's base. The smell of the weapons room through the stone walls. The smell of a place that was alive and working. The smell of 3 years of her life pressed as carefully as wildflowers, and finally understood for what they were. Not failure, not loss, not the story of a woman who was foolish enough to love someone who wasn't looking at her properly. The story of a woman who had enough love to give that it filled 3 years of the wrong space and still had more left over than she knew what to do with. She breathed it in, without flinching, without grief, with the easy or clear regard of someone who has learned the difference between the things that made her and the things that defined her. She pressed a wildflower in Lyran's journal that morning, deliberately, without apology, with the particular uncomplicated joy of a woman who has fought for the right to remain entirely herself, and won. She hoped her daughter kept the habit her whole life. "She means well," Riven had said. And he had not been wrong, exactly. She did mean well. She had always meant well. She had brought warmth into rooms that had forgotten what it felt like. She had pressed beauty into the pages of her own life without asking for permission. She had loved honestly and grieved honestly, and stood at the center of a chamber and told the truth without rehearsal. She meant well, and then she had gone further than meaning. She had done well, and she had done it alone, and with the right people beside her, and she had come back, not for what she had lost, but for what couldn't be taken from her if she refused to let it be. She had pressed wildflowers without apology. She had learned every name. She had said goodbye with her hands pressed flat against a cold window, and then she had taken the southbound bus and cried quietly toward the glass, and then she had dried her face and looked forward and built something real from the pieces of everything she had always already been. Her name was Elira Moonridge, and she was exactly, defiantly, and completely joyfully that kind of woman.